ensuring that states do domesticate legislation that will protect women and girls in cases of violence. So, and there's a case for political leadership. So I think it's wonderful that the High Commissioner is here speaking about this. It would be wonderful to see more politicians making it a real political issue as well, a platform that they also want to be standing on and making it something that they care for. Because the more people speak about it, the more we can actually start addressing the issue. But I think, you know, the government does have a role, but we also have roles as individuals. We have roles as parents, family members. So you know, the issue of violence against women and girls is an issue of power, fundamentally. Girls are vulnerable, and they are taken advantage of by some men. Of course, not all men, and we should be very clear about that as well. So our role is educating boys and girls in a way that boys respect girls from a very young age, that they understand what respect is, and that we also have a good understanding of what it's like to be a man in modern-day Nigeria. So men don't have to be, you know, macho and violent to be men, and to be strong, respected men, and they can be that without resorting to violence. And I think that's our role in our communities, to constantly speak up about that and to speak out when we see language that suggests that violence is acceptable, or when we hear about violence and we turn a blind eye. So we all have a responsibility as well.
You talked earlier about education, which is a form of empowerment, but you also still find people who are educated, who are financially empowered, yet they're in relationships that are so violent, yet they can't leave. What is the idea behind that, and how can such women be helped?
Well, the point about education that I was making was around how it gives girls a voice, it gives girls confidence, it helps them to understand what their rights are, it helps them to understand how they can raise the problems. And as Laura was saying, it also is part of the education for boys. The violence against girls, the violence against women is completely unacceptable. But of course there are perpetrators of violence who are educated. There are victims of violence who are educated. What we're doing is shining a spotlight, if you like, on this problem, encouraging people to talk about it, to raise the issues, and to say loudly and clearly that this is not acceptable. And government absolutely has a role in that, but the media has a role in that, Channels TV has a role in that, we all have a role in that. And it's really important, I think, that we call it out, that we say it as it is, and that it isn't hidden in the shadows, but it is something which is genuinely recognised, and that there is a sense in society that something needs to be done about that, whether you're educated or not. Frankly, is irrelevant. In fact, if you're educated, then I think you have even more responsibility to speak out on that and to use the arguments to condemn violence in all forms.
Okay, so we understand that this issue is there. It's like, as someone will say, the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
So how do we tear down this elephant, break it down to small bits, so that each individual, not just we've talked about government, we've talked about individuals. Each individual can take a hold of it and begin to run. So let's look at the 16 days. From the 22nd of November, you're going on till December the 10th. What would be seen, or what would be heard out there as we go along?
Well, I hope what we'll have over the 16 days is a lot of debate, a lot of TV interviews bringing out this issue. I think we should be giving a platform to the victims of violence and helping them speak in a safe area, if you like, about what they've gone through, how it has impacted on them as individuals, because you know, there's the immediate moment of the violence, but then it lasts a lifetime in many women's hearts and in their lives, and I think we should recognize that. I hope we will see a lot of people who are speaking about this, and that's what the 16 days is, and that's why I think we should celebrate that it's not just one-off day, as is often the case in these international days. It's a moment, but actually, you know, rape is not just a moment, it lasts way beyond the moment, and the 16 days is also about talking about the impacts of what happens before and after the incident in itself.
Okay, Mr. Arkwright,
sorry, I just wanted to answer that. The 16 days, this is an international campaign, okay, and it's a campaign which the British government is encouraging everybody to debate, sort of across the world, whether from China to the UK, to America, to Africa, everywhere. So it's very much part of an international campaign, and I think Nigeria should see itself in that context as part of that international campaign, join in the international effort to tackle this scourge, and really step up and show that Nigeria doesn't have to have the reputation that it does. It could be a beacon of hope, if you like, in the world in this area.
When you say the reputation that it does, how do you mean?
We know about the stats, right? So I just use one of them. 1/3 of all, and this is a well-known fact. There's a reputation of Nigeria in the UK for corruption, for example. There's a reputation sometimes around violence, around security. Your program I was watching just earlier was about insecurity. Some of the images of Nigeria in the UK are very much formed by what is happening in Boko Haram, for example. So it's how can we move away from that agenda, and important it is to a positive. And part of my job as High Commissioner and Law's job here is to emphasize the positives in Nigeria. This is in many ways a negative story, but it can be turned into something which is really strong and positive.
So let's look at these positives. If we have issues of violence here, I actually penned down verbal abuse. Let's just say, okay, abuse now. I penned verbal and physical abuse against women and girls. So, and yesterday was 22nd of November, official commemoration of the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls. Today, International Day, Spotlight on Violence Against Indigenous Women and Girls. Now, let's look at how we can, it's painful, but in a way I've experienced a woman being abused. I mean, my neighbor was abused, and over time, her self-esteem was lost.
Right.
But there have been, Nigeria is a signatory to the international conventions against violence against women and all of that. But do you see those conventions being domesticated here?
Well, in some cases they haven't been domesticated here. So, I mean, there's a difference between signing an international agreement in a big conference at the UN in New York and actually then taking the steps to implement that at national and indeed state level. You do have the VAP, which is obviously part of this debate, but actually all countries that sign up to these international conventions have responsibilities and obligations to take action within their local legislation, within their national and local legislation. And in some cases that has not happened in Nigeria. It's really important that it does happen, that a government which signs up to a particular commitment is seen to be following up on those commitments.
But within this,
so I agree with you. I mean, it is really important that those are taken forward.
Within the 16 days, would you be having an interface with the political class in Nigeria to see about how to ensure this conversation doesn't just stay within the media?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm based in Abuja. Okay. I love coming to Lagos, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Great city. I'm based in Abuja, which means that I have interactions with politicians, with ministers, with the Senate President, with the Speaker of the House on a regular basis, and absolutely. And it's not just in this period of 16 days. It's not as if on the 10th of December we suddenly switch off and decide that's the end of the issue.
No.
It's really important that. So this is a way of raising awareness, of stimulating a debate in Nigeria. So it shouldn't just be two British diplomats who are raising this issue. It should be people in the National Assembly.
Which is why I'm coming to this question, if I may come in here. The question actually was, you have these interactions, but what's the feedback you've gotten in the course of interacting with them as regards this issue of ending violence against women and girls?
People do take it seriously. I mean, I genuinely think that people take it seriously. The issue is around prioritization. So the National Assembly has a whole range of legislative measures that they need to get through before the end of this session. I would like to see the National Assembly give this higher priority than it has up to now. But I think there's no doubt. I mean, I've never met a politician who's told me, at least to my face, this is not an issue in Nigeria. This is not important for Nigeria. And you know, if we can make the link between this issue and women's representation in the National Assembly, which is pitifully low. Well, I would make some kind of link, to be honest. There's around us, I don't know if you agree with this, but it's around society's expectations of women in Nigeria. And the difficulty of breaking through into politics. We had a really interesting discussion yesterday at Law's residence with a group of very young, sort of 20 to 25-year-olds, about politics and about breaking through into politics and how difficult that is for young people, but in particular for women. So again, it's around creating the right kind of environment to enable that to happen. And when you've got more women represented in Parliament, in the National Assembly, anywhere in the world, then some of these issues do take more prominence, and I think that's absolutely right.
Okay.
We'll have to.
We'll just go on a quick break, and when we come back, I have a question for Laurie concerning stigma, particularly for women who's been raped or who's been violated in some ways. Just stay with us on the program.